Welcome back, everyone, to the Lions Automobilia Foundation Museum. Today we're here with another drag racing legend, Carl Olson. Carl, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in drag racing?
Yeah, I actually fell in love with motorsports at the age of 3 when my aunt and uncle took me to a midget race in Carpinteria, California in 1948. And I just fell in love with racing and decided I wanted to be a race car driver. And when Lions Drag Strip opened in 1955, my dad was taking me to circle track races out here at Gardena Stadium and Ascot Park Speedway, and one night they told my brother he had to take me with him and his friend out to Lions Drag Strip because my parents had some kind of a social event to go to, and my brother complained bitterly about it, but they said you have your choice. You can either take Carl to the races or you can stay home. And so he and his friend took me out there, and that was 1957, my first drag race, and I decided that night that I was going to drive top fuel dragsters or top gas dragsters or something really fast.
So speaking of Lions Drag Strip, for those of you that don't know, Carl Olson actually won the last drag race at Lions Drag Strip. Can you tell us a little bit about how that day was of the last drag race?
Yeah, actually it was a 2-day event, and there had been very little planning done because the harbor department that owned the property on which Lions Drag Strip was located had only notified the management about a month earlier that they were going to not renew the lease, and consequently the track was going to have to shut down. So the track operator at that time, a guy named Steve Evans, very quickly put together this program for a big event for the last event at Lions Drag Strip, and did some quick promotion. And once the word got out that this was going to be the end of the iconic Lions Drag Strip, participants came from all over the western United States, and in some cases as far back as the Midwest. Had a tremendous number of entries of race cars in all of the various categories, and Friday night was dedicated to qualifications, and out of the 55 or 60 top fuel dragsters that were there in attendance that night, we were very fortunate to qualify number 2 with, if memory serves me correctly, about a 6.09 second elapsed time for the quarter mile. So we knew that we had a pretty good chance of being competitive at the race. And then on Saturday they held the final eliminations, and it turned out to be the most bizarre motorsport event of any kind that I have ever attended in my lifetime of attending motorsport events.
So you have actually told me some stories, well, because you're a board member here as well. He has told me some stories about the last day at Lions where people were taking parts of the tracks with them to go home.
Yeah, unfortunately, track management was able to discourage that kind of thing until the race was actually over, which the race actually completed in the very wee early morning hours of Sunday, December 3rd, because of the many distractions throughout the event. At 6 p.m., the sheriff closed the gates because the facility had reached the maximum capacity that the sheriff felt was reasonable. And the thousands and thousands of additional spectators that wanted to get in to celebrate this last event just leaned over the chain link fences and came swarming in like ants. And nobody has ever had an actual count of how many people attended that race because there was no way of knowing. They stopped selling tickets at 6 p.m., but people were still coming in much later that evening and well into the wee hours of Sunday morning. But they did manage to, we worked our way through the eliminations, and there were delays because of people standing on the racetrack, and there was a very strange mood that night, somewhere between a celebration and a funeral almost, because Lions was more than just a place to race. It was a culture that had evolved over any number of years. And I don't think any drag racing historian would argue the fact that Lions Drag Strip was the epicenter of drag racing during the time that it was open. So for that culture and for that place to be closed forever, there was a very strange mood that pervaded the entire event. I think the security people that were hired to maintain order saw what was happening and they just disappeared. They ghosted. They were long gone. And so it kind of turned into anarchy in a way. It was a bit of a free-for-all. But we finally managed to get to the starting line for the final round with Jeb Allen. And Don Perdome and Tom McEwen were the two finalists in Funny Car. Very appropriate because both of them had raced extensively at Lions and by that time were cult heroes in drag racing. And we ran the final round, and we had been warned by numerous people that it might be advisable after we ran the race to stay at the far end of the track and wait until some of the craziness subsided a little bit. And I think we were probably down there for more than a half hour, and there were fires burning and signs were being ripped down, and finally when we were told, okay, it's okay to come up the track now for the winner's circle ceremonies and a few photos and whatever, as we worked our way back up to the starting line of the track, we saw people with pickaxes that were digging up chunks of the surface. People were unbolting sections of Armco guardrail.
Oh my goodness.
And anything that wasn't metallic or pavement was probably on fire. I mean, it was insane. It was a crazy time. And it left memories that will stay with me for the rest of whatever I have life here on Earth. Most of them very positive, and a few of them still amazed that we made it through in one piece.
So racing at Lions, you raced against a lot of guys that had legendary last names, especially now. Was there any drivers or crew guys or just anyone at the track that you look up to or mentored you while you started your racing career?
Oh yeah, any number of them. Two of the racers that I enjoyed racing against the most were James Warren with the Warren, Coburn and Miller Ridge Route Terrors car from Bakersfield, and a guy named Kelly Brown that drove a series of top fuel dragsters and a few funny cars. I liked racing those guys because there were no games with them. They were hardcore racers that never tried to pull any funny stuff on the starting line or wait to fire their car so yours would overheat. I mean, there were a lot of people who would do anything to win a drag race. But with those guys, it was absolutely straight up. I think one of the people that I learned a lot about and a lot from wasn't a racer for a long time, but he was the starter at Lions, a guy named Larry Sutton. And Larry eventually drove race cars himself, including top fuel dragsters, and he was very good at it. But he was the dean of West Coast drag racing starters. He ran the starting line at Lions Drag Strip in such a way that there was never any hanky-panky. Everything was always very structured, very precise, and if there was a problem, he would sense it long before anybody else would, and I believe in my heart he probably saved some lives along the way by spotting things that were, he could tell you that when a car would make a burnout at Lions, he could tell if there was something wrong that eventually was going to probably result in an engine explosion or fire or something. And he would shut the car off and the racers would go crazy. No, you can't do that. Oh, it's just going to cost us this race and whatever. And then they take the car back to the pits and take it apart and figure out, oh my God, this thing, this was in backwards, or, we had spark plug wires crossed, or, this was an impending disaster for sure. And this guy probably saved us, if not from getting hurt, at least from destroying an engine or crashing the car. So Larry Sutton would be very high on my list of heroes.
Larry Sutton, so when the Lions Automobilia opened for the grand opening in 2019, we invited a lot of the legends, including Carl and Larry Sutton, to come down. And I remember walking in, we had Larry Sutton dressed up in his uniform on the starting line and watching all these legends that actually raced at Lions walk in. What was your first impression when you saw those doors open and saw the starting line in there?
I find it very difficult to put into words what my reaction was, because it was such an emotionally overwhelming sensation. The first time I walked into the Lions Drag Strip Museum, I flashed back 50 years in my life. I got goosebumps and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, because it's so realistic visually that it took me right back to those golden years that, from 1957 until 1972, I had pretty much spent every Saturday night at Lions Drag Strip, and it felt like I had just walked in there again.
Going through a time machine.
Absolutely.
So out of all of the cars that you've raced in your entire career, what would you say was your favorite car and why?
My partner Mike Kuhl and I drove a lot of cars before I got together with Mike Kuhl. I had cars of my own. I raced Top Fuel cars with guys named Jack Ewell and Bill Stecker and Tom Bell. I raced some with a guy from Northern California named Don Bowman. But when Mike Kuhl and I finally got together and formed a team, we raced together for 50 years, either drag racing or land speed racing at the Bonneville Salt Flats. And we had a Top Fuel front engine car first, and then we built our first mid-engine or rear-engine car that we took on tour in 1972. Very successful with that car. We won the NHRA Winter Nationals. We were runner-up at the Bakersfield March. We took it on tour and won the International Hot Rod Association World Championship. So I have a lot of strong positive feelings about that car, but we built a newer car at the end of the 1972 season that we planned to race in 1973, and that was the car with which we won the last drag race at Lions, and it was the prettiest and the most comfortable race car I ever drove, so that would certainly be my favorite. We also built another car in 1974, in which I ended my driving career, and we were very successful with that car. Won the Bakersfield March meet, got in the Prager 5 Second Club, and did really well with it. But that 1973 car, or our second rear-engine dragster, will always stand out for me as the one that I love the most. And Mike and I tried to find that car to restore it, because we loved it so much, and we were able to trace its history after we sold it so far, and then it came to a dead end and we were never able to locate it. And it's the one regret that we shared forever, that we were never able to locate that car and restore it, because we loved it so much.
So you mentioned land speed earlier. What is it that you did in land speed?
I went to the Bonneville Salt Flats, to Bonneville Speedway the first time in 1967. And I watched a car go by at 350 miles an hour, a streamline. And that's the fastest I had ever seen any kind of a vehicle go. And I fell in love with the place. Unlike drag racing, which is all about very rapid acceleration followed by even more rapid deceleration, Bonneville is about building up to and maintaining top speed. And you don't race against another vehicle at Bonneville or the El Mirage Dry Lakes, which is where hot rodding really had its roots. But you had the opportunity to maintain a high rate of speed, well over 200 miles an hour, for a very long distance. The course was 5, 6, sometimes 7 miles long. So it wasn't until 1990 that I had the opportunity to drive a car at Bonneville, and during my years that I served with the National Hot Rod Association as a vice president for 25 years, and was in a situation where I really wasn't able to do anything other than attend all of the NHRA national events and travel nationally and internationally and all of the other things that I did, that my father-in-law, of all people, who had been a Bonneville racer back as far as the 1950s, offered me a ride in his modified roadster. And I drove it the first time at Bonneville in 1990. And by 1994 was able to set the record in that class and back it up and attain membership in the Bonneville 200 Mile an Hour Club, which was one of my lifetime goals ever since the first time I went to Bonneville in 1967. And to wear that red hat is something that I do with pride today. And from that time, my father-in-law and I built a streamliner that went even faster. And then in 2012, my old partner Mike Kuhl and I built a rear-engine, blown fuel modified roadster with the attempt of getting in the 300 mile an hour chapter at Bonneville. And we were well on our way until he developed Alzheimer's syndrome, and it started to become more difficult for him to stay on top of things mechanically, and his health was spiraling down. And so in 2016 we ran there for the last time, and then in 2017 we sold the car, and that was the end of my driving career.
What is something that you would tell your younger self about your whole career?
Don't change a thing.
What would you tell the next generation driver that's looking into getting into drag racing?
Follow your passion.
Nice and simple. I love it.
That's all that needs to be said. I can't think of any way to embellish those thoughts any more than those simple statements, because, I feel that I have led a charmed life. I drove fast race cars pretty much all my adult life, never got seriously hurt, had success, had failure, had ecstasy, had heartbreak, went through a litany of experiences and emotions, and it all added up to the conclusion that I had hoped for myself when I set out on that course in life, and that is just to enjoy what I was doing and pursue it with great passion, and stay focused on the objective and enjoy every minute of it.
So you spend quite a bit of time here at the museum, come to a lot of shows. For those that haven't been to the museum yet, what would you like to tell them?
Put it on your bucket list.
Yeah.
And do it sooner rather than later. I certainly hope that this place will be around for time immemorial, and I have every confidence that the way that the foundation is constructed, that it will be here for people to enjoy for a long time. But why would you put off doing something magical? And that's what this place really is. It's a magical experience. And if you just happen to be one of those people that either attended a drag race at Lions Drag Strip or learned about it because it closed in 1972, so unless you're fairly long in tooth, you probably weren't there. But if you heard about it and you heard about what a great place it was, then to come experience it, either looking back to your experience with it or learning more about why people hold such reverence for it, it's something you really need to do. And I think it's important probably to point out that Lions Drag Strip Museum is only really a very small portion of the entire Lions Automobilia Foundation, which includes the incredible car collection that Rick Lorenzen has put together, along with the other objectives of the foundation, which is youth education and training, maintaining the history not only of drag racing at Lions, but motorsports throughout Southern California in general, dating back, a century or more, and paying homage to those people who dedicated their lives to the overall Southern California motorsport car culture that is on display here in virtually every aspect of its dimension. Anytime that I can experience a snoot full of nitro fumes, I'm a sucker for nitromethane, and I'm a dragster guy. I'm a top fuel dragster guy. I owned a funny car for about 3 weeks one time, and As soon as I put an engine in it and fired it up in the driveway at my house over here in Torrance, and they lowered the body and I ran it for a couple of minutes until the fuel shut off, and they lifted the body, and I got out and I put it up for sale the next day. I wasn't attracted to funny cars for any number of reasons, not the least of which is that Top Fuel was still the king of the sport. But it doesn't mean that I don't have all the respect in the world for the people who did that and the people who have maintained the history of those cars by restoring them and repopping them and bringing them out to play with. And the amount of enjoyment that I've had and that I had with my partner Mike Kuhl until he passed away was with our last front-engine Top Fuel car that is what is commonly referred to now as a cackle car. We don't race it anymore, but we push-start it or static start it and burn some nitromethane and then brag about how fast we used to go and all that kind of stuff. And we had as much or more fun doing that as we probably ever did racing. And to see the number of people that have dedicated their time and their resources to restoring and preserving these cars and bringing them out, starting them up and letting people enjoy them. Yeah, when that happens, if I'm anywhere around, I'm going to be there.
I do think we might have a couple Cackle Fests lined up for this year.
Yeah, one in particular that comes to mind that I think is going to be really special, and that is the December 3rd celebration of the golden anniversary, the 50-year anniversary of the closing of Lions Drag Strip and the last drag race at Lions, which is, in some people's minds at least, the most iconic drag race maybe ever held anywhere. And to be able to celebrate that, we're going to have a formal sit-down dinner. We're going to honor the people who won all of the categories of competition at the last drag race, and we're going to have some of those iconic cars out here to start up and remind people what it was like 50 years ago when drag racing was king in this part of the world.
Stay tuned for the next video.